Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the November 22nd, 2022 Educational Affairs meeting. We will begin with roll call. Ms. Haywood? Present. Mr. Schultz?
Present.
Mr. Cohen?
Present.
Ms. Henry? She is present. I see her in the Zoom room, and Leah Mulhern.
I'm present. I could not unmute myself, but I'm here.
That's okay. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Ms. Henry. And with that, we will move on to our minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the October meeting? And a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? All right, and the motion carries. The minutes have passed. This evening, we have a full agenda. We have 3 items to discuss. The first is a presentation from Mr. Pimentel on gifted education. The second is a presentation on the school calendar. And the third will be a presentation from about our FlexSpace innovation grant that we have received. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Pimentel for the gifted education update.
Welcome, everybody. So this is an update. The thing that we're looking to specifically discuss in this presentation on gifted education is our equity of access to gifted services. We'll do sort of a little talk about where we were, the things that we've done, where we're at now. That's the focus for this particular presentation. So where we started. These first couple slides are just some boilerplate stuff. You've actually probably seen these before. These are cut and pasted from previous presentations. And this is just sort of reminder slides. So when we're talking about gifted education or students with a GIEP is a more accurate way to state it. The state of Pennsylvania law requires that those students conform to two requirements. Number one, that they be found to possess outstanding intellectual ability, and that number two, that they're found to be in need of specially designed instruction. And if a student has those two things, then they qualify for receiving services that come through a GIEP. So when we talk about, people will say like, well, what do you mean outstanding intellectual ability? That sounds so vague. What does that actually mean? Chapter 16 clarifies precisely what that means and how to define that and what the metrics are for that. And this is an example here of what we're using currently in Cheltenham School District. When we go to make those determinations, all of these are various scores and sub-scores that we look at when making determinations to comply with Chapter 16 requirements. And then you can also see that some of those things very clearly align to paths of support, which gets into the specially designed instruction. So for example, if a student has really high fluid reasoning, then we would know that we need to likely put in place math supports for that particular student. As opposed, and they may not need anything for English language instruction. And then, so this, just to make clear that this slide is measuring nothing. This is purely conceptual in order to try to illustrate sort of a point that remains or is a point of contention around the need for specially designed instruction in gifted. So the black line represents a generic and indefinable level of the highest level of rigor that we can give students in the general ed setting, meaning no GIEP. And so you can see it kind of starts to move at a faster rate after 7th grade. That's where you can start to stratify courses. And sort of in theory, a 12th grader could be taking all advanced placement coursework. And so the rigor level in the gen ed setting is very, very high, right? So then when we're talking about that need for specially designed instruction, sort of everything in the blue is where you would sort of place that. So if a student, their need level is above that line, then we need to provide them with services through a GIEP because they are still above the rigor line, so to speak. So it's just kind of one way to think about it. When we talk about the continuum of services in Cheltenham, K to 12, always there is space and room for individualized needs. That is sort of the bread and butter of gifted education. And then when we sort of look at the way that we target a lot of students in grades K through 6, we're going back to those original assessments and trying to determine, does this student need primarily math support, ELA support, both, or again, going back to the individualized piece, maybe get something else. And so then we sort of, there's a little twist in that, hitting at about 7th grade, we broaden the math piece to STEM in general, trying to get them sort of broaden the horizons, because that's also where math starts to stratify itself in the gen ed setting. So we have a little bit of a twist there, and then moving into the high school, again, you can see the individualized needs goes across. We continue to provide ELA and math support, as well as individualized goals that we can write around other courses and other needs throughout high school. But then we also have the design thinking course, which is a course specifically for gifted students, where they are able to develop a project with the guidance of teachers built on the principles of design thinking, which all kind of comes back to project-based learning and, you know, our trip in 2 weeks. Okay, so then the actual presentation sort of starts here. So where we started, this is an old slide. This is from 2017. What you're looking at on the left-hand side is the total population of all Cheltenham students in 2017. And on the right-hand side is the gifted population of students in 2017. And so this was sort of the initial data set that sort of set off all the alarm bells that we had a serious issue around equity of access for Black students in gifted services in Cheltenham. And so this is kind of our starting place to know that we had a problem. The next step, for those who were on the board at that time, you may remember when we had Dr. Ford come into district. She spent some time with us. She helped conduct the gifted audit that was on the other side of this data. She's generally considered one of the premier experts on minority recruitment into gifted services, not just for Pennsylvania, but on a national level. And so she did the audit piece and then also gave us some of the key recommendations that we put in place since she was directly working with us at that time. So a lot of what you're going to see in the next section is sort of a combination of her recommendations with the specifics of our district and what we needed to do. So one specific thing that she gave us that's sort of a key part of this presentation is something she developed is what she calls her equity formula. So what she's trying to do is say, if we're simply looking at direct proportionality when you're talking about gifted services, then even the most equitably minded districts still fall short. And there's a whole myriad of reasons for that. You would need to be Dr. Ford to know all the reasons for why that is. But what she's tried to put together is a method, a formula, to be able to take any district and say, here's a rough target that you can give yourself that is like the bottom level of where you want to try to be. And so this slide sort of shows the math behind how you would formulate that data point for your own district at any given time. And so if we look at this slide here, the gray line represents Dr. Ford's equity formula applied to our district over time. So the reason why it's sort of a moving target is that the demographics of our district are changing over time. And so as basically each year, your target is different than the previous year. You need to recalculate. So that line, which we'll kind of come back to a few times throughout this presentation, that is sort of like this blanket target that we want to sort of aim for that she has given us. And so kind of hold that in the back of your mind as we move forward. When we go back to the pie charts that I was showing you before, and we plug in that 2016 and 2017 gifted population data into this graph, the blue line represents where we were at that time. So you can see we're quite a ways away from the equity target. And just using that 2016, 2017 data, using that as a projection data, you can kind of see the overall picture is like the equity formula is moving this way, and our percentage of gifted students who are Black is moving this way. And so there's this growing gap. And that's kind of where we were in 2017. So what did we do about it? So just a couple quick points. Number one, which alludes to the need for the equity formula in general, which is that this disproportionality in gifted ed is like a national problem. It pervades different states, including states that have very different laws around what it means to even be gifted. They have the same problems. So it's not just like a Pennsylvania specific legal issue. It's something that we see nationwide with gifted programming. Pretty much any state that has it has this problem. There's really no blueprint. You know, if at this point, if we were like, well, just do what XYZ district does, we'd already have done it. Everybody's trying to figure out the problem. Even when we had Dr. Ford here, at some point we just said, so just like, what do we do? Like, how do we just fix it, right? Like snap our fingers and make it better. And she was like, yeah, that doesn't exist. She's like, you have to solve this problem district by district, individually, you know, almost like one student at a time. So there isn't just like a fit-all solution there. So in that sense, we're trying to solve everybody's problem. Like if we fix it here, everyone's going to be asking us what we did. So that's kind of the nature of the problem and the challenge. And so with that said, we've taken on an experimental mindset. You know, the whole idea is like, look at the data. Where does it tell us to go? What other changes do we need to make? That's the way we're trying to move forward. So if you look back at our gifted identification protocol in 2017, sort of the three circles you see in the background are what's called Renzulli's theory of giftedness. Joseph Renzulli is a theorist around gifted education, and he has this theory about there's these three concentric circles that all sort of make up what it means to be gifted. And so when you look at our original system that we were using to identify students, on the above average intelligence piece, we were using the COGAT as our general screener, which is that's the test you give to every single student in second grade, just to see like who might be gifted. And that particular test was heavily biased. And that was a previous presentation from years ago. I didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but there'd be examples where there'd be like pictures, and a lot of it was like very culturally nuanced, and that it wouldn't be something that was like sort of a blanket statement. So we shifted from that, and what we use now is the Naglieri nonverbal abilities test, which uses shapes and squares and colors and symbols. Sort of the best piece of research on it is where they compared students from Papua New Guinea to students from Westchester County, New York, and they have the same average scores. So that they're like, this is as culturally neutral as you can make an intelligence test. And that's the one we use. And I will say also our internal data on that looks very good too. So our own data can corroborate it. We still use the WISC-5. That is like the most commonly used intelligence test. It's what we use for special ed. It's what we use in it as well. It gives the richest data set. You can see in the old system, we really had no way of assessing creativity. This is a point of contention in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, we are not gifted and talented. We are only gifted. So there is no space in Pennsylvania law for dance or music or theater or any of those kinds of things, which are of course gifted talents, but Pennsylvania creates no space for that. It's very academically centered. So it makes it very hard to add a creativity dimension in Pennsylvania, whereas other states, it's very easy to do that. So what we did was we incorporated the Torrance test of creative thinking. This is a test that came out of World War II. It is also shown to be very culturally and racially neutral in terms of large scale outcomes. And it's a way that it specifically tests divergent thinking. So it's not testing like vague creativity. It's testing a student's ability to come up with multiple solutions to a single problem. That's like the specific thing that it is trying to measure. So it's not a generic creativity look. It's a look at, can your mind create multiple solutions to one problem? That's what it's trying to do. And so we incorporated that into our testing procedures. And it's also a way that we can identify students for gifted, is specifically through that method. Under the task commitment piece, if you kind of notice on the 2017 side, that triangle is very thick, and then it's more balanced in the right-hand side. That's because the way we were looking at task commitment was largely through teacher recommendation and report cards. So the problem with that is teacher recommendation, without the proper training, there's a very strong correlation between behavior and the view of a potential student and their perception of being gifted. Whereas the student who's like shooting spitballs, like he's like, that's not the gifted kid, when actually maybe he is. And he's shooting spitballs because he's bored, right? Or something like that. So there was a little bit too much emphasis there. And the problem with report cards is that an A in any class is basically an assignment that you have mastered the grade level content. So from a gifted lens, that tells us literally nothing. So we moved away from those things, and we're much more reliant now on computer adaptive tests, which will find the student's level no matter how high it is. So if we have rich CDT data, we'll use that. If we can incorporate IXL data on top of that as well. And starting with this school year, we have started using the MAP test as well, which is another computer adaptive test that works for younger students, kindergarten, first, second grade, whereas the CDT does not start until second grade. So it's another way to get some data. So those are ways that we've tried to rebalance things. So this is kind of a precursor slide to showing you some updates on the data, which is to sort of show the timeline here. So we started conducting the audit 2017, 2018. As soon as some of these really rough numbers were coming out, we did a temporary pause on universal screening until we got our new process and procedure set and in line. Any, parent referrals, we were still doing that testing, but the universal screening we were taking a pause on. And then just as we did come back and we're up and running, but just prior to literally a month prior to giving the Naglieri, we broke for COVID. And then the nature of gifted testing requires in-person testing. And so then there was an equity issue about the fact that we had some students in school and some students not in school. And so again, we're still doing parent referrals, but in terms of those universally screened kids, which is that's the most important group from an equity lens, all of that got put on pause. So then when you look at the 2021 sort of last school year and running into this school year, if we could give trophies to our school psychologists, we should, because they basically did multiple years of backlog universal screening testing all at once. The other thing it means, sort of going back to that experimental view, is that what we don't have is nicely plotted little data points that track their way across the screen because we didn't have the data points. So it was a data dump, not a collect the pieces as we go. So there's been a certain amount of faith that we've had to sort of put into the changes we made over this time, waiting for all this data to appear, so to speak. So that kind of is the end of the things that we've done so far. So now is a look at the current data. So the red dot that you see on the right-hand side is our representation of where we currently stand with regard to Black and multiracial students and their proportion of the students who are identified as gifted. However, it requires some caveats. So number one, again, it's not this, the plot that you see there is imaginary. That is not an actual plotting of what happened. What I'm trying to illustrate is that it's not this projection that would sort of suggest oh, if we just keep going, it's going to get better and better. That's not the reality of the changes we've made. The changes we made create plateaus. So you make an improvement and it goes up here, but then it's just going to keep running at that plateau until you make a new improvement. So I wanted to try to illustrate it looks like that, not oh, we're just moving toward the sun, so to speak, And the other thing, which is an important note, we'll get into some of this data because I don't want to, I want to be clear about what this data really is. This is current 4th through 9th grade students. And the reason why it's current 4th through 9th grade students is that our current 10th through 12th grade students were identified under the old protocol. So if we're adding them into this data look, it's going to obviously bring the number down, which it's we're not trying to hide that. It's just that actually obscures the changes that we made. So the overall number isn't reflected by including those students. The same thing is true for grades K through 3, because in grades K through 3, it's only parent referral because the universal screener happens at the end of 2nd grade. Most of the actual testing occurs in 3rd grade. We have not yet completed all of the testing for the current 3rd grade class, although we will by the end of January. So we actually could include 3rd grade by the end of January. So that's why that shrunk in case anybody's why aren't you showing us all the data? It's because all the data actually creates, it's one of those things where more data actually creates a skewed version of what's going on, not a clearer picture. Okay, so the left-hand graph here, just to sort of show it back into the original data as you as the board have sort of seen since 2017. The left-hand is the pie chart that you saw previously and saw many years ago. That's the 2017 data. On the right-hand side is that grade 4 through 9 gifted percentiles under the current protocol with the data that we have. So that kind of shows you some of the shifts that have occurred and where that growth is coming from. So you can see sort of overall, we've doubled the proportion of Black students who are getting picked up. And we've also reduced the percentage of white students, which is relevant because especially under the 2017 data, we were over-identifying white students based on Pennsylvania criteria. So we've kind of come back closer to reality with that group, and we've increased the share of Black and multiracial students. And so this is, I might do a little toggling here, just to sort of illustrate this. The left-hand side here is that K through 3 and 10 through 12 group. I just like stuck them together into one pie chart because the numbers were the same, basically. And so you can see when I do a little toggling back and forth from the slide, it just showed you, kind of to me anyway, maybe I'm too deep into this, so I think this is cool, but like the 2017 data and these two groups are like exactly the same. So see, I'm kind of toggling, you see like it doesn't change at all, which sort of says like, you know, that's where the data would be if we didn't do anything. And so that shows the changes we've made and the impact that it's had so far. So taking a little bit of a deeper dive into like, okay, so what's the process? What does this look like for us? What improvements need to be made moving forward? Where are we still having problems? Because we have not reached the equity formula given to us by Dr. Ford. So there's still a gap. What next? So the first piece is looking at that universal screening tool. Our shift over to the Naglieri has produced data that falls into Dr. Ford's formula for equity. So that is a good tool, and it's giving us that initial group of students who we want to move forward with. We're in a good place from a start. So luckily, like that's definitely heading in the right direction. At the end of that process, that happens in the spring of second grade, then we start sending out permission to evaluate forms. And I actually had an email from a parent recently asking a question about this. We do not ask parents to sign permission to evaluate forms for the universal screening tool because all students are tested. And anytime we test all students, we're not required to ask for permission. However, if you're going to test any particular student for further testing, then you do need permission. So once we go from that section to the next section of testing, the parents have to agree. Like we can't do this against the will of families. So permission to evaluate forms go out. And what we're getting back from that is disproportionate. So we're starting from a disproportional place at the beginning of like the next phase of the testing window. So some things that we've done about this already, because we sort of discovered this data toward the end of 2020. And so the key things that we put in place there is we have new protocols around trying to reach back out to those families. The normal protocol is that we reach out 3 times. And then under normal protocols, if no one returns any communication after 3 times, that sort of ends our attempt at trying to get a permission to evaluate form. But now at the end of the 3rd attempt, that particular student sort of moves into a new domain. And so from that point, we start having the general ed teacher reach out in case their rapport with the family can help get a signature. The challenge consultant reaches out separately for the same purposes. And then what's happening literally like today and tomorrow is that we try to catch the parents in person at back to school night, parent-teacher conferences, and say, oh, by the way, we have this, can you please sign it? And explain what it is and try to get a signature in person in case the issues like the paperwork in transit and all that kind of stuff. So those are the things that we're trying to work through now to reduce the disproportionality at this step of the process. And then when we look at the next phase, the Torrance, the CDT, all those shifts that we're making, we're sort of viewing the data is coming in at like marginally equitable, meaning it's showing you the data you're seeing. Like the data that we're seeing is producing improvements, but it's not reaching that equity mark that we want. So there's still sort of a further dive that we can make in some of these things, and some potential changes and adjustments to still make. But sort of the key thing right now is trying to get all those permission to evaluate forms in that we can to produce that equitable profile moving into the second phase. Okay, that's the presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Pivotal, do we have any more questions?
Sure. That was such a good presentation. So clear. Thank you for it. Thank you for all the work that you and your team are doing. And I'm just, yeah, thankful is the key word. It's the week, the word of the week, but also seriously, just the fact that you all are approaching this with such a methodology that you're able to piece out, this is where it's breaking down, is so valuable. Within that, that disproportional section where it's kind of I just want to fully understand. So the letters sent out to families, and it's in that 60-day window, it just isn't being sent back by some proportion of families in an inequitable way.
But just to clarify that, the 60-day window actually refers to when parents do sign.
Okay,
We have 60 days to complete testing.
I see. Thank
Yeah.
you. That's
So
great.
that the window is actually kind of endless
Thanks.
almost.
Sure.
Like if a parent sent me a permission to evaluate form from a year ago, we'd be like, great, 60 days starts today.
Okay.
So yeah, that's not an issue.
And are there parents who are actively not interested, or is it like, have you seen that it's more on they don't necessarily recognize it as something that needs to be sent back? Do you know, does the question make sense?
Yeah, I think there's issues, there's some potential issues with like community education about understanding what it is. I think there's some fear or concern that it's something akin to special education, which is just like a fear that you're going to say there's something wrong with my child or that this is a negative in some way. I think it's not necessarily clear that what it means. And so there isn't necessarily the same level of buy-in that you might find in other groups that view it as like a badge of honor or something and really want the designation. So that I think that might be one of the many factors that influence it.
Yeah, thanks. That's it.
I saw Ms. Henry's hand.
Hi, I'm Mr. Pimental. So Dan kind of got to a couple of my questions, which was, I was wondering if there is any data that identify why, parents aren't responding and what is being done to educate parents, families about, the gifted program.
So, pardon me. In terms of a data point to say why, something doesn't jump to mind to me that would be something I could look at that would answer that question from a data lens. So I don't have an answer to that question, or I don't have a data point to it.
So what I would suggest that we will look at moving forward is that we know the number of individuals based on the universal screening who would potentially move on to the next phase. I think we have to be a little more strategic, and we mentioned some of the steps in terms of reaching out to the families, but there could be some type of survey or scripted questions that we could ask that can give us some of that qualitative data that you're referencing. So that's some dialogue that I'll have with Dr. Smith and Mr. Pimental at a later moment to explain what some of our next steps to give us those data points would be.
Thank you, Dr. Scriven and Mr. Pimental. That's actually getting at what I was asking. And so with data, and what I was just talking about, Mr. Pimental, so you kind of understand, is did we understand why? Do we know why people aren't responding? And that's what Dr. Scriven pretty much alluded to, and reaching out and trying to find out, why, parents aren't so apt to, want to have their kids in the school. In that program. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Mr. Cohen?
Thanks. Following up on that, thank you for the presentation. Is there a way to do it the other way, to do it where it's an opt-out versus having to opt in?
My understanding, and Dr. Gallagher could probably speak more clearly this, but my understanding is that that's not an option.
That is true. We do need to have them sign the permission.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very clear, and I really appreciate the intentionality of both and the persistence in getting the permission slips back, but also moving towards that target. So when I look at the 2017 data and I look at the 45% target, I would imagine that that changes based on the percentages of Black students within the district. So is that target different now for 2022 data?
Yes, if I go to this slide, it's not real obvious because it doesn't grow quickly, but if you look at the gray line, over time, it's slowly rising up. And so the furthest right-hand side is based on current data.
Okay, so the 2022 is the 45% based
Yep,
on current data.
exactly,
Okay,
yep.
thank you.
Mhm.
And then just kind of the same, not David's question, but similar to your question initially. Do we perceive that there could be any language barriers? I know that we have a lot of new families in the district, some of them don't speak English as their primary language, so I'm wondering whether that might be a barrier as well.
That's an astute question. I think we could look at the target groups where that would be most obviously affecting what's happening there. Luckily, the Naglieri does kind of step over that. So at least gives us that first group, which is nice. The second piece is that there is some allowance in chapter 16 for that as a specific, something that the school psychologist can take into account.
Okay.
And so that there is some provision in there that allows us to have some wiggle room in those cases.
Okay, and I was also thinking in terms of the permission slip. Portions.
Oh, sure.
In
Oh,
combination,
okay.
and both.
Yeah, oh, that's yeah, that's a really good question.
I was just going to say, we do have a language service that we can use, that we call, and they can call and talk with the families. We've used that in the past. Our ELL teachers usually help us with that. And then we can get all the documents translated as well. So that's what we have used in the past.
Thank you.
We're aware of that as an issue.
Mr. Cook?
Another question, a different area. Has there been any pushback from white parents in terms of more so than historically, as far as you can ascertain without doing a study, in terms of saying, well, how come my student's not gifted? Is there a way to basically get special treatment or preference or way around the way they're being considered now?
So I would say, I can only speak qualitatively, sure. But qualitatively speaking, I would say the two themes that came up, one, this was early on. So this is when we first announced the change to the gifted procedures and sort of had this conversation. So this was during Dr. Ford's original visits. There was some concern by white families that there was going to be a sort of headhunting that was going to happen and that students were going to be exited out of gifted, like targeted and moved out of gifted. And we made it clear that that was not something we were going to do. So that was like the initial concern. And then I would say that the other piece of it has less to do with gifted. I haven't gotten a lot of pushback around. I mean, individual parents will be unhappy if their child is not found to be gifted, but that's just kind of the nature of gifted testing and people not getting what they were hoping to get. I think there was more specific pushback around the shifts that we made with the quote unquote challenge program. And I'm specifically talking about the group of students who were not gifted, but receiving challenge program services, which were akin to gifted services. And the way that we repackaged that as project-based learning and STEM experiences, which is what we do now, I think some of those changes, as they first were rolled out, there were some parents who felt like they were losing something. But we also get such good feedback on the current new system that seems to far outweigh the negative feedback that we got for some of the initial changes.
Great, thank you.
Any other board questions?
I apologize for forgetting to ask this. So the screening occurs in third grade functionally, correct? Or it's end of second, third, is the thinking that I know from the past, I remember from the past presentation, the thinking there is that that's a good sort of sweet spot of everyone moves at a different pace, and that's if you tested earlier, there are kids who might be gifted but might not be showing it quite yet, but would be soon thereafter. Is there value in a GIEP in K through second? Like, I don't know. That might be a loaded sounding question.
No, I think I understand. Yeah, so there is a debate and tension about when do you do the universal screener. Because the earlier you do it, the longer you can potentially provide services for the students who get found by the screen. So in theory, like first day of kindergarten, right? Like, welcome to kindergarten, take this test and let's see who's gifted. The problem, paradoxically, it's actually not that students don't show giftedness. Just like if you're talking canvassing large scale populations. Over large scale populations, what happens is students who come from highly enriched homes overperform their actual age group, and that the other students are performing on level. And then if you check back with those students in 5th grade, you actually find that that student who we said was gifted in kindergarten is actually not found to be gifted now. And that that's actually the tension point. So when you pull back too early, you end up identifying the students who came from a highly enriched and an education-rich home, and not just sort of a true raw measure of intellectual ability, which is what you're actually trying to look for. So the tension then is that the sweet spot for that is 4th grade. And so then the problem, if you wait until 4th grade, is that now you've lost all those years. And so everyone debates, like, when should you do it? So 2nd grade is like a compromise, like early enough to catch kids, but also late enough that you're not having completely skewed outcomes because of that factor.
And that's national.
Mhm.
That's not,
Sure, that makes sense.
that's something that most districts and even a lot of your larger systems follow. That's end of 2nd grade as the test point. So I just wanted to clarify that's not something we're making up on our own. It's research based.
And you'll also see that phenomenon in like PSSA testing. So students, well, PSSA is maybe a bad example, but other standardized testing. So students in kindergarten, 1st grade who outscore their peers by phenomenal amounts, you retest them in 4th grade and they're average. So that's kind of the thing you're trying to avoid.
Thanks.
Any other board questions? Okay, before we go to the public, I'll just comment. I don't think I have any additional questions. As I'm writing down my questions, the one was something you answered before, we even finished talking about that permission to evaluate. How are we reaching parents? And I think finding all of those other ways, because when they get a letter from your office, you're not a name they recognize. And, so hearing from a classroom teacher, a principal, someone else that might be that phrase, going to conferences, I love all of that, just doing our best to meet people where they are. And I know when I've sat in meetings with you before, Mr. Pimentel, not as a board member, a lot of what you hear from families is that they just don't know. And you can't play a game if you don't know the rules of the game. So, I think families don't know, they don't know what to ask. They don't know in 1st grade you can request an evaluation. They don't know it's even a thing. So I think the more that we can educate our families and do these things to really follow up, that's awesome. And agree, the presentation, the level of detail, how clear it is. And especially on this specific slide, the discussion of it being a plateau, that we just need to get to the next plateau and the next plateau and the next plateau. This is not just, we can't sit back on cruise control.
Exactly.
So I really appreciate that. Do I have any questions from anyone that's on Zoom or in the room with us this evening? Yeah, sure. If you could state your name and your location in the township, please.
Sharon Mardifo, and I live in Glenside. And I just had a question about gifted and talented. It's my understanding that you cannot provide less than state code, but you are free to provide more.
I mean, I think that's true in general.
So if we opened it up to talented also, don't you think that would be more appealing to people and they would be more likely to want to get a GIEP? It'd be more attractive.
It certainly could be more attractive, yeah.
That was my comment.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions in the room? Oh, yeah.
Hi, Gabrielle, Gary, I live in Elkins Park. A question I have, and again, echoing what everyone said, this has been really fantastic data to look at, about how you're changing, how you're looking at the process of informing parents trying to go to conferences and et cetera. I wonder also if the test of reputation precedes it. You kind of talked about it, of how many extra steps after they sign, parent signs that form as necessary for a parent. Like, are there extra meetings, extra conferences that might make a parent say, I don't have the time, I can't make that long-term commitment to that initial signature, even if my child is doing, exceptional or gifted.
So if a student is found to be gifted, they do quote unquote have to attend an annual GIEP meeting. Pre-COVID, that was a hardship for a lot of people because they have to take a day off work, they have to come during school hours and all those things. One sort of benefit that's come out of the COVID moment is that we've all learned how to use Zoom. And I think especially for gifted meetings, my challenge consultants tell me that almost all of the GIP meetings now are by Zoom because the meeting itself is not that long. And a parent can easily ask their boss for 45 minutes to step away, as opposed to like, I need to take a half day away from work. And lots of employers will give you that grace to like, yeah, that's okay. You can go sit in your car and like take it on your phone, and we can like be much more flexible that way. So it's a really good question. My hope is that there's less of a barrier now than there has been in the past.
And then so that's being communicated. Obviously, right now that is a Zoom opportunity, that there's much more flexibility. So thinking almost like your reputation, you're doing great work, your reputation is preceding you on that.
So just for clarity, I cannot honestly say that we're communicating directly with people. Like, now, just so you know,
Yeah.
like you can do all this by Zoom. Like, I don't think we're that proactive about it. It's, to be honest, it's more like people whose children have already been found to be gifted, get notified that it's an option,
Gotcha.
as opposed to saying to people, if your child is found to be gifted, this isn't going to be a huge ask on your part to try to, manage this over their, time as a student.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, Lisa Hessbacher, Winco resident. I had a question around 2E students. So students who are gifted in certain areas, but also have learning differences or learning disabilities. How does that factor into the equation around GIEPs? And do we have a breakdown of like the number of students that receive special education services that also receive gifted education services?
Yeah, so actually it just happens that it was, and I apologize, I will retract this later if I have the year wrong, but I think it was 2020 that we received our gifted cyclical audit from the state. And so, the state is very concerned about that particular topic. And so we did have to spend quite a lot of time looking at that data and those numbers as a part of that audit. I do apologize that just off the top of my head, I don't have the numbers. But that is sort of a big piece to what we look at around identification. I think the two other thoughts that came to mind when asking a question, the first is that, just for clarity, twice exceptional students have an IEP only. The gifted components that would normally go into a GIEP fit inside of the IEP as subsections that get incorporated into the overall IEP. So the student technically doesn't have both an IEP and a GIEP. They have an IEP that has gifted services built into it. That's kind of like the sort of technical piece on how that works. And so their main case manager is still the special ed case manager. And then the gifted case manager is sort of technically subservient to that around the gifted pieces.
Okay. So do we have that data? Do we have the ability to look at that data?
Yes, yeah, that's very easy to pull.
Because I feel too that, as we're looking at the disproportionality of students, there may be students in that 2E category that are also in other categories.
Yeah, so just to be clear, this data includes twice exceptional students. This is all students who have a gifted designation, including twice exceptional students. In terms of running disproportionality around twice exceptional students, the only problem there is that the sample size is so small that disproportionality numbers are not valid just because of the sample size, that's all. So it isn't that we can't run it, it's just you don't have enough students. If one white student are added, it'll change the percentages by such a huge amount that it doesn't, the proportionality data on that subgroup doesn't give us super meaningful data. It doesn't mean we don't want to look at it. I just mean from a larger picture, it's not super relevant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Sarah.
And this is just kind of off the top of my head. I was just thinking about the QS. And I know as a parent, it's always nice to have a parent who's had the experience before, kind of reach out to you and share. And so perhaps parents of gifted students now, in some way without violating confidentiality, have a way to reach out to those parents and basically share their experience and because in reality, that documentary is only going to be obviously benefiting your child, but still it's nice to know, right?
And just two other thoughts that kind of relate to that. One thing I failed to mention earlier that we did do is if you look up Cheltenham Gifted Education right now, our gifted page, I've taken what used to be text. It was like a brochure kind of thing. It was very dense. It would require somebody to like sit down and read through this thing to like figure out Pennsylvania state law and what this means for Pennsylvania. Like it was a lot for somebody, especially somebody who's like trying to hold down multiple jobs and like, who has time for that, right? So I tried to take all that and package it into 3 different videos, which is what you see on the website now, which is like just kind of a generic, like here's Gifted Ed in Cheltenham. Here's, if you're thinking about requesting that your child be tested for gifted, here's a video just on what that's all about. And then there's one just on gifted at the high school. And so it's there just to try to like give you kind of that other snapshot. And I was actually talking to Ricky, who works in our communications department, about it. And she was suggesting that I even take some of that snippet down into almost like, I mean, I can't imagine I'm gonna get a lot of views, but like, you know, like TikTok video type kind of things, like something that's even shorter, like just the real snapshot, like to try to get something that people would be able to connect to quicker and easier and have less of a barrier to entry.
It sounds funny, but we have to keep up with how people are communicating. Any other questions for anyone that's in the room? I cannot see if there's any Zoom room questions.
I might have to back out. Apologize if I make a big mistake here.
Oh, maybe up at the,
Oh, yes,
hover over
I'll
that
share.
and it'll pop down. There's the,
Sorry, and this thing is like strangely sensitive. So like,
you click on more,
Yeah, click on it.
good chat.
Yeah, nobody in chat. Nobody in chat.
okay. And then is there a Q&A too?
You can click more again and you can
No,
see.
no Zoom
No
questions.
Zoom questions.
There you go.
You know,
Okay.
All right, if there are no other questions on this particular topic, we will move on to the next one. Thank you so much, Mr. Pimentel.
Sure.
We'll hear from you in a few more minutes. But I think I speak for everyone. Everyone, thank you so much. That was really useful information. We will move on. I believe we have a video from Dr. Smith explaining the calendar changes. No, they're not changes yet, but recommendations. Thank you. I don't want to say the wrong word regarding the school calendar for next year about spring break, professional learning, and the results of the surveys that were sent out.
And just so you know, I've been tasked with answering questions
Okay.
for this session as well. And just so you know, as you're watching the video, I do have Dr. Smith's presentation.
Okay.
So if you're like, oh, I wanted to see that slide, I can pull it up for you afterward so you can see it more clearly.
Thank you.
And I apologize, this might take.
Good evening. The following presentation presents our.
I do apologize. Just a moment. I have to make sure. Yeah, it's. And I'm an Apple user, so I'm like, if you can't tell,
Teach me.
I'm
Probably
lost.
under more again. And you're gonna want to make sure to hit share sound as well. Checkbox on the left.
Oh, you know what? That might actually solve the problem. we were like testing this out earlier today. There was one sound problem we were having. So, all right, let me just start it over here.
Good evening. The following presentation presents our school calendar survey data and recommendations for future and upcoming school calendars. The first concern that is under consideration is rethinking spring break. Our current spring break is a full week before Easter Sunday. The proposed calendar would propose that our spring break start on the Thursday before Easter Sunday and end on Easter Monday. Also for consideration is the proposal of half-day schedules bi-weekly every other Wednesday in order to give our staff and our teachers an opportunity for additional professional learning. There is no impact on our transportation options, and right at school for our aftercare program, K through 6, will be provided at $46 per month. In other words, $23 per session. And if students are already enrolled in Right at School, there is no additional cost for this additional Wednesday. So again, for consideration is a half-day, bi-weekly, roughly every other Wednesday would be a professional learning day for our teachers and also for our staff. There would be for students an early dismissal every other Wednesday. The first slide shows our family data. And essentially our family data tells us if the Cheltenham School District moves to bi-weekly early dismissals, families will mostly continue with their current after-school child care option. What you see in red on the pie chart indicates students and families who have selected the bus as an option. The first pie chart is what we currently do or what families currently do, and the second pie chart indicates what they would do in the event that we went to every other Wednesday as a half day for professional learning. The blue indicates families who pick their children up by car. The orange indicates our current families who use Right at School in the top chart. The bottom chart in orange indicates families who would use Right at School if we were to go to every other Wednesday as a professional learning day. And last but not least, the green indicates families who would arrange alternative options other than what is listed here on the chart. This second slide is continued family data. 62% of our families are positive or neutral about increasing the frequency of early dismissal Wednesdays. 21% feel the change is not needed, and 17% believe that they will be negatively impacted if we went to a schedule with every other Wednesday as an early dismissal. The blue part of the pie chart indicates or represents the percentage of families who are in agreement with the Wednesday proposal. Red is the number that represents those who are neutral. The orange are those who are against the proposal, and the green indicates the percentage of families who believe that this will be a logistical and financial hardship on the family. And now we are at our teacher survey / CEA survey data. In comparison, 86% of CEA are positive or neutral about increasing the frequency of early dismissal Wednesday. 12% feel the change is not needed, and 2% will be negatively impacted if a proposal for every other Wednesday as an early dismissal day is approved. And again, the blue indicates those who are in favor, red, neutral, orange, those who are not in agreement, and green, indicates those who believe they will be negatively impacted by increasing the frequency of early dismissal Wednesdays. Back to our family survey data. These slides are in response to the spring break question. 70% of families are positive or neutral about the proposed adjustments. 30% do not support the change. If the change were to occur, 88% of families would not be significantly impacted, and 12% have indicated that this would lead to some level of a hardship. So I draw your attention again to our pie graph. The blue at the top indicates yes to those in favor of the update to spring break. The orange, neutral. The red, no. The second major question was, would this change to the calendar present any hardships with childcare or other challenges? Yes is in blue, no in red, and orange, somewhat. Again, as it relates to spring break, 49.6% of CEA have indicated no. 8.8% do not have a strong opinion. 41.7% indicate yes. And also, it must be noted that approximately 31% of our CEA members believe that if this spring break change were to take place, they would have to manage some type of related hardship. This graphic shows our 23-24 academic calendar. On the left, that is a calendar that will reflect our current spring break model of a week, a full week. If you look at March of 2024, you will see that the spring break is Monday, March 25th through Friday, March 29th. And students would return to school the Monday after Easter. The calendar on the right represents the proposed change to spring break. Again, I draw your attention back to March of 2024. The spring break would start on March 28th and it would conclude on April 1st. So again, it would start on Thursday, March 28th, and it would end on Monday, April 1st. The rationales around the change in spring break are as follows. There are three that came up consistently with all of our stakeholders. Rationale one, this change would align us to our sister school districts who surround us. Rationale two, if we go to a shorter spring break, it would allow students and staff to have a shorter school year by 2 days. And number three, that came up consistently as a rationale is the notion that those who celebrate Easter Sunday on Sunday could use the Monday after Easter for traveling and to return to their normal activities. So again, the calendar on the left, if it were approved, it would reflect our current model of a full week of spring break. The calendar on the right, if approved, would reflect a shortened spring break. And let me also draw your attention to the calendar on the right. You see a blue star over June 10th. That blue star indicates the last day of school for students. If you look to your left, that calendar has the last school day as June 12th. So again, if we shorten the spring break, we will have a shorter school year and we would dismiss on June 10th as opposed to June 12th. This calendar, the 24-25 calendar, again was created, the left-hand side with the current model for spring break in mind, and the right-hand side reflects the proposed model for spring break in mind. In this case, let me draw your attention to the calendar on the right. The calendar on the right again reflects the updated spring break proposal. Spring break in 2025 will begin on Thursday, April 17th, and it will conclude on Monday, April 21st. The last day of school with the blue star would be June 12th. If I can draw your attention to the left, the last day of school for students in June of 2025 under the current spring break model would be Monday, June 16th. So again, the rationale that was proposed for spring break is one, the new model would align us to our sister school districts. Two, the new model would adjust the end of the school year, allowing students and staff to have a shorter school, not a shorter school year, would be able to be dismissed earlier from the school year. And three, the new schedule would allow families who celebrate Easter Sunday to have that Monday for travel purposes or readjustment to get back to their day-to-day activities. The following slides represent the recommendations from the various stakeholders that we engaged with in this process. The calendar committee supports or is neutral to a new spring break. The calendar committee supports the biweekly early dismissals. So just to repeat, the calendar committee is on board with both of the changes. The Office of Education is also on board with both the new spring break and also on board and support the bi-weekly early dismissal dates. The CIPD is also in agreement with the updated spring break and supports bi-weekly early dismissals on Wednesdays. And when I say the CIPD recommends and is in support, they were either in favor of the updated spring break or neutral to the updated spring break. This was a much smaller sample, so we did not give percentages as we did before with the pie charts because this is a limited group. And just as a reminder, the Curriculum Instruction Professional Development Committee is comprised of school level administrators, central office administrators, as well as teachers from all schools K through 12. So again, the CIPD recommends an updated spring break and supports the bi-weekly early dismissals on Wednesdays. And to clarify, the CIPD recommendation was either people were for the updated spring break or neutral to the updated spring break. This chart represents our two largest stakeholders that responded to the survey, CEA and our CSD families. As it pertains to bi-weekly early dismissals, you can see on the chart we had a positive response from CEA at 68.6%, families 38.4%. Neutral response, CEA 17.2%, families 23.9%. What we did in our interpretation as an Office of Education, we combined the positive responses and the neutral responses to say that people who responded either positive or neutral were in favor of the bi-weekly early dismissals. In terms of does not recommend, CEA 11.7%, families 20.8%. An indication of hardship associated with this change, 2.5% from CEA and 16.9% from our CSD families. Again, I wanted to clarify that the Office of Education, in terms of looking at recommendations, we combine the positive responses with the neutral responses in order to foster our thoughts further about this particular recommendation. But we also broke it down in the graph to show exactly what percentage said positive, yes, and what percentage were neutral. And this final chart around the modified spring break is very similar to the previous chart. Those who agreed to spring break, CEA 41.7%, families 47.6%. Those who disagree to a modified spring break, 17.2% of CEA, 30.4% of our families. And those who were neutral to a modified spring break, 49.6% for CEA, and those who were neutral for CSD families, 22%. In terms of those who indicated a hardship associated with this change, CEA indicated 30.8%, and our CSD families indicated 12.1%. Next steps. Our CSD Board of School Directors will vote and approve the 23-24 and 24-25 academic calendars at the December 2022 legislative meeting. They will take into account all of the recommendations and the data from our stakeholders that were presented this evening. And with that, I ask that if anyone has any questions, please pose those questions now, and I apologize for not being in person to respond to the questions, but I trust that my colleague, Mr. Pimental, can absolutely answer any questions that may be available at this time. Thank you, and have a good evening.
All right. Thank you to Dr. Smith for taking the time to make that video for us and explaining everything. Do we have any questions from the board that Mr. Pimental could answer for us? Mr. Schultz?
Sure. What was the sample size of those surveys, or what was the respondent rate? Do you have it, or do you know?
I do know. Sorry, let me just make sure I'm doing this right.
Oh, yeah, I will pause my question.
Okay. Yes, okay, let me give you concrete answers. So survey sizes for the community, just shy of 1,000.
Okay.
For the teacher groups, just short of 300.
Okay.
And there's 435 teachers in the district.
So I noticed that the change from the current utilization of the different dismissals was, it looked like around 4.5% shift from pickup and bus to either something else, which is green, alternative childcare option, or CSD sponsored aftercare. And so I guess 4.5 of 1,000 would be 45, or yeah, I got that. So it's about 45 families that would be changing something, and around 190 families who are saying there's some logistical challenge because it was a 19%. So there's something in between there where there's folks who have a logistical problem, but there's no action they're taking to solve it in those terms. And I'm just curious what that means. Does that mean there are going to be kids who are now having to be home alone, and so they don't have an alternative childcare option? But anyway, these are, I'm sorry, I'm sort of processing out loud and confirming that I'm understanding what's happening. I guess my actual question, because I think the logic behind this change makes sense. It's being recommended from all the committees, and I wonder if there are financial supports we could provide for what seems like a very small percentage of our families who might need additional help like if there was any kind of application, you know, you wouldn't, if it's a small number of families and it's, you know, roughly $46 a month, we might be able to afford to take the burden off of certain families who particularly need it if there was you know, some criteria that would allow them to take advantage of that. I appreciate if this is it's not actually a problem, or I guess that's kind of why. Do you see, does the data indicate that there might be some families who might need assistance that aren't getting it? And I'm worried about those families falling through the cracks of a change like this, is I guess what I'm getting at. But I'm also curious if you are worried about that at all.
In terms of that specific group, that sort of data shift, because we don't have qualitative data to back it up, you know, I don't have a really clear response in terms of what exactly that means. Like, trying to interpret the data to what it could mean, but I can't say that it means X, Y, or Z necessarily.
We're looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So that's all. I'm just, again, sort of processing and thinking through it as we go. And it occurs to me that, you know, if/when this change is made, I don't know, but it makes a lot of sense. We can just keep an eye out for, are there families who maybe are showing signs of needing that sort of assistance, and maybe we could explore providing that at some point. Because the numbers aren't overwhelming. It's not like, you know, 80% of families said that there's a problem, but 19% is not an insignificant number of families, and better understanding what those logistical problems are might be worthwhile. So thanks.
Mr. Khan.
So I guess more of a comment, which might lead to a question at some point. So this, if it goes into effect, is more than half a year out, and things can change between now and then, both in the positive and negative in terms of family, about both for the spring break change and also for this faculty, and also for the early dismissal. And also, to some degree, people might have plans now that could change, and also people might not have plans that could change as well going forward. And I don't want to overstate that, but I think that is somewhat of a valid hypothetical or philosophical viewpoint. I guess my concern with offering somewhat of a way to ease the burden on people, I'm not saying there's not a burden, I'm sure there will be a burden for some cohort of people, is to do it in a way that obviously is done in a way that's thoughtful and doesn't embarrass them, but also does it in a way where it's not people getting a free lunch when they don't need a free lunch. And I'm not sure how best to do that. I know we can't solve this now. That's not the intention or purpose of the board in this meeting. I just want to point that out as well. Also, the survey itself, not to overstate this point, but the way it appeared to be structured was that there's positive, neutral, does not recommend, and a hardship. And I think a hardship is probably a combination of 2 points. One is where it's a hardship, and also where people just didn't want it because they didn't want change for whatever reason. And we don't know what that breakdown is, but again, just want to point that out as well. And then I guess two questions now. First question is, I'm still unclear, is it every other week or is it twice a month? I know I raised this question before the meeting and I'm still unclear. And I think if I'm unclear, then the public might be unclear as well. We should just get that messaging straight about what it is. And I recognize some months there might also be a holiday or other reason why it's not also consistent, but just trying to get the messaging straight. And it's something I'm sure I'll put a calendar out so that people can also plan and know what's happening, both for students, for parents, guardians, and also for faculty members. And the last question is just a reminder, what's happening now in terms of snow days, which are really probably no longer snow days, unless you experience a Buffalo situation or a huge snowstorm. But again, we probably do, I assume there's some type of snow days, quote unquote, snow days put in for power failures, floods, whatever is happening. What currently are we doing about that in terms of the calendar purposes? So that's, I guess, my one real question.
Gotcha. Well, for the snow day question, I mean, yeah, we've definitely thinking about all of the potential, options that we have. I think Dr. Scriven could probably speak more clearly to that than I can, but that, for example, as we've coming into the winter season, communications going out to teachers to say, you need to be prepared. Like, you have to make sure that you're taking your computer home if there's any sign of a potential storm coming, because we may choose to have an asynchronous or synchronous day, and we need you to have your equipment at home so that's so that you are prepared as an educator to be able to go into that mode.
And my question was more so, how many days of FAN do we build in for more events, and probably aren't snow days, but again, if there's a power outage or a flood or something like that?
I think we have it more under the umbrella of inclement weather.
Okay,
And I want to say 5.
okay.
It's on the calendar. It always is. If
Okay.
you look closely, the star is the last day. And then if you have young children, you pay very close attention to this because you need to know when the last day of school is. And then it also says, student days, 184, 4 days included. I guess it's maybe not very clear here, but it is in other places. You look up last student day, snow days included, last teacher day. Anyway, you back up, basically, depending on how many you use, you get them back.
So the one question around that is the shift in thinking around COVID and the pandemic. There's actually requests that have to be submitted in terms of flexible instructional days. And I'm getting confirmation as to whether we even applied for those flexible instructional days. I don't believe that we did this year, which means if we had an inclement weather day, then potentially it would be a legitimate inclement weather day and not a remote day.
So I guess my question then becomes is right now, and I do see it says snow days included, is we might want to think on the calendar just to not ever think about change it from snow days to inclement weather emergency or something else.
That makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Taylor?
Mr. Pimentel, in terms of the modified spring break, did you look at both the disagree and the hardship together as you did the agree and neutral?
Let's see, modify. Let me just get to the right slide.
Yeah, and you can just use the table as an example.
Oh, okay. Modified spring break. Okay, sorry, can you ask the question again?
Yes, I know Dr. Smith said that they looked at the agree and the neutral together. It's basically the neutral representing, you're not in favor, you're not against it. So they looked at it in the favorable side. Did we also combine the disagree and the indicate hardship together?
For the Office of Education recommendation.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. I just wanted to make sure I'm reading that correctly. And then I know that Dr. Smith also offered 3 reasons why we're thinking about modified spring break. Are there any academic advantages for the modification of the spring break?
Are there any academic?
Any academic benefits?
I would need to report in terms of what CIPD
Because I know the
recommended.
3
from
rationale,
that.
and none of them were academically good.
Understood.
I don't know if it's what Dan's gonna say, but off my mind, I'm thinking of PSSA testing, when that is, and then when AP testing is as well, is that more academic days, you're gaining 3 days, 2 days before that testing occurs, which depends on when Easter falls, of course. Those things move around. I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Yeah,
but
I just
a-
curious.
In fact, just to tag along with Mr. Cohen's comment about the every other versus twice a month, we did discuss that the last time we talked about this, and that was, I think, an ongoing, just to clarify it, I think that we may have discussed it at the time, but I would throw it in again, that this particular, the academic calendar that is shown in the presentation is kind of like the quick guide that I think a lot of families use when they're planning, and those half days have never been indicated on that calendar, and if we do approve this calendar that will now have double the half days, I would wonder, I know it adds another color, but I would wonder if that might be, as a parent or a community member that's quickly, the only way to find those half day ones is to know right now, second Tuesday, but unless we're off, and then it's a different, or Wednesday, I even said the wrong day, see? So just throwing that out there, just again, the more we can communicate this clearly and concisely to families, I think would be, really, really helpful. And one other question, can we be reminded who the calendar committee represents?
Wait, who's on the calendar?
Yeah, just not specific names, but titles or
Sure.
committee members.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a combination of central office administrators and building, and they're with parents on it.
On the calendar. Thank you. Mr. Schultz?
This isn't part of half days, but in-service days. I'm curious, how does our district compare to neighboring districts in terms of our numbers of in-service days? And also actually in terms of half days?
So in terms of the in-service days, we're on par.
Okay.
Because the state gives us those days. Those days count towards your 180 school days. If we were to do more in-service days, then that would push our calendar. The last day of school would have to keep getting bumped. But for those days, and if we took less of them, then we'd be basically giving up in-service days that we have. So that's
that makes sense. I'd heard folks, think parents will be like, it's service day again. It's helpful to understand that we're actually pretty much in line with what other school districts in Pennsylvania are doing. So, thank you.
Did you want to know the half days as well, or?
I am curious if there are other districts that are doing this type of twice a month or every other week half day for professional development.
I think in order to answer the question accurately, I have to get you like a full list.
Understood. I'm sorry, I didn't think of the question ahead of time.
Where it started from was not so much looking at what are our neighbors doing, but looking at what are the districts and the school systems that are, beating the curve on performance data. What are they doing? And actually many of them do every Wednesday. As sort of one of the key levers that they use in order to be able to train and get staff together to look at data and to develop instruction. So that's where it came from, not so much like, well, just what's everybody else doing. It was more targeted around our, as we make improvements around our use of data.
It's a very compelling point for a community conversation. Thank you.
I think it was a good reminder that as we are, in December, making these decisions, that is the root of the recommendation for the biweekly, to be able to get staff together to really look at the data and move us in a different direction. So, yeah, that could be shared as part of this. That would be great as well.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone in the room or in Zoom?
No question.
No questions. Okay, we got the answer. There we go. All right. If there are no other questions from the board, we will move on. Thank you, Mr. Pimentel, for answering those for us. And now we can talk about the FluxSpace Innovation Grant. Yeah, very exciting.
These times you're accidentally going to click that link.
Oh, I keep clicking on the thing. Okay, so this is a review of our selection for the Pandemic Recovery Fund through FluxSpace grant, and our sort of role as a partner in that. So sort of the big picture is we're directly receiving $635,000 in equivalent funds for the support of project-based learning, STEM programming, and innovative instructional practices is kind of the big picture of what the funding is for. Just some background, our relationship with FluxSpace originally started with a connection between Dr. Riley and Ryan Anthony, who is sort of the head of FluxSpace. They developed a relationship through a connection at the MCIU. And then since 2019, Cheltenham and FluxSpace have really worked a lot together around innovation, education, FluxSpace sort of playing the role of professional development provider, and also just sort of like thought partner about what are the big things, what are the most cutting edge things happening in this space, and how can we integrate that into a traditional public school system. And so basically that relationship, when FluxSpace became the original recipient of the Pandemic Recovery Fund grant, they were looking for who they wanted to partner with, and we were at the top of the list of the people to make that connection because they knew that we were already doing the work. And that it wasn't going to be like, oh, we've got this money, let's make something up that looks like we're doing it. They knew we were already doing it, and that this money was going to go to strengthen the things that we're already doing. So following a project scope and application process in this last summer, we were selected for that role. And then early this fall, myself and Dr. Scriven went to FluxSpace to meet with Ryan Anthony and the CEO of Corbett, which is sort of the parent company of FluxSpace, around sort of the details and what the process would look like. So this, I'll kind of gloss over this for now, but the Pandemic Recovery Funds is specifically there to sort of support these kinds of things for all of the grant recipients for these funds. And then we're sort of looking at within these three specific pillars of where the fund money is going to go, which is physical spaces, the training and professional development of teachers to be able to provide STEM education for the students, and then specifically money put into the necessary products and products and programs that we need to try to implement some of these things. So when looking at the physical space improvements, this kind of actually harkens back a little bit to the gifted topic when looking at how we utilize our challenge consultants and knowing that they're now playing the STEM role. Significant portion of the space funding will go toward making their classrooms into real STEM labs. Right now, they're sort of like doing the best they can, but this will really kind of pump up those spaces, and it'll be unrecognizable when they're done. You'll walk into the space and know that this is not a quote unquote a regular classroom. Some of the space funding will also go towards secondary challenge and PBL rooms, and also sort of doing an audit of other potential space improvements, like some science rooms at the high school we're looking at, and also some collaborative workspaces in some locations as well. This is just kind of an idea. These are things from Corbett and FluxSpace, sort of ideas. Some of it is sort of furniture upgrades, specifically oriented towards the use of STEM equipment and STEM education. And then also sort of things that are, bolted into the wall, so to speak. So storage, cabinetry, all those kinds of things that we would need for the space itself. Second piece of it is the actual products and programs. So part of that is things like, if you look on the kind of upper right-hand side, that's a Makey, which is a way to teach young kids how to program. It's like the very, very fundamentals of computer programming, and sort of the way that you can manipulate those things. That's kind of part of it. What is it? I forget what they call this bottom one. I've seen it like 5 times. The fork farms is what they're called. So there are other districts who have done this already, where they actually supply the entire district with lettuce. So the district does not buy lettuce anymore. The students make it, and they use their own lettuce, which is organically grown. So people literally go and cut with these things. It grows things at unbelievable rates. So it goes from nothing to fully ready in very, very short time periods. And it's there. You can imagine all the lessons that you can build into those kinds of things. So that's just an example of a product that the funds could be used for, that obviously then build into actual lessons. Some of the funds is also earmarked for a whole series of trainings for teachers, so that we're not, the classic mistake in instructional technology and STEM education is oh, the district found the money to buy this really expensive toy, but no one knows how to use it, or how to use it as an instructional tool, or how to actually teach kids to do something that will stick with them for 20 years. That's where those things often fall apart. So this training is there to make sure that the training and the understanding of what the purpose is there before the selection of a potential product. So that it's we need our kids to learn how to do this now. What do we need to do or purchase in order to get them there? As opposed to, look at this cool toy, what do we do with it? So that's really what that piece is about. And so then sort of in total, you can see the sort of direct funding is 635,000. Although in addition to that, now some of that is split with another district. So it's hard to give a total number, but we're looking at somewhere at like 750, even up to $800,000 of sort of quote unquote total value that we'll receive as a part of this partnership. So that kind of gives you a general picture of where some of these things are going, and sort of our next steps in this. For some of you who've been here for a long time, like this adventure that we've all been on around PBL and putting these things in place, this seems to be sort of our next thrust about trying to support this stuff.
Thank you. Do I have any questions from the board?
Just have a better sense about the background. Does this money originate? Is it American Rescue Plan Act money that went through the county, or is it CARES money, or is it money partly from Flux Space? I'm just a little confused about where the money originated from.
So it's a great question, and I know that they mentioned it when we were there. I don't remember exactly what the original source of the funds was, but it was a partnership between. I think it had something to do with the county,
Okay.
and through Flux Space, who already had that relationship built.
Okay.
You can elaborate.
And the money, at the best of my knowledge, is money from the county, from the recovery office, which is money that they've received, federal monies that they've received to use within the counties
Okay.
in different ways. And there was a huge application process. The township applied, like every school district, township groups like this applied, and to get funds, and Flux Space was awarded one of them. So that's at least the gist of how I understand it to be.
Great. I guess tied into that part, because I have some background in this, is the not onus, but is the requirement going to be on Flux Space to do all the reporting in terms of whatever they have to do in terms of meeting the needs of the county and of the federal government?
Yes. So Flux Space. Yes, exactly. Yeah. That was kind of our thought.
Good answer.
Yeah. They're the owners, so to speak, of the grant, and then we are their partner and sort of a recipient of their work. You could sort of think of it that way, for the grant funds.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all.
No
Same
question, just a comment. It's exciting.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Schultz.
Plus one to the exciting. This is great. Around which students will have access to these spaces is, you mentioned the challenge program, and I know the challenge, I remember you all presented about that, I think a year ago, but who will have access?
So for the spaces at the elementary schools, every student in grades K through,
That's great.
for all the elementary grades, will filter through. We already have this whole cycle built. So it's literally just changing the room where they're already getting the service. So right now, every student rotates through the challenge room twice per year for specifically designed projects per grade. So that'll just continue. It's just the space that they come into will be improved. And then when we're looking at the secondary space, there is some more selection there for students who are more interested in that as an educational pathway. And so that's why we're looking at some additional support for the project-based learning rooms, and also like the science rooms, etc. So trying to put it in the right places.
One caveat that was there was around the collaboration, and especially at secondary and at the high schools, where we're trying to create innovative spaces for students to gather, problem solve, have student discourse. For instance, the courtroom, courtyards, and other areas throughout the building. And that's part of the process, is doing a space audit, which the team has already come out and done, to determine how do we just create a different culture and a mindset around the way we think and approach 21st century characteristics.
Great. So very cool. And I'll just say, in the younger grades, where twice a year is a great introduction. If it sparks a kid, I wonder if working with, or making sure that the library system of Cheltenham is aware of the kinds of technologies that they're being exposed to, because as they're pursuing their own facilities and infrastructure and strategic plans, maybe they could make sure to have some of the technology that's available in those classrooms for access to the general public at any time they want. So really cool stuff.
Two comments, not so much questions. One, I'm grateful that Dr. Riley and everyone else that was involved, the relationship had already begun with FlexSpace, so that we were at the front of their mind when they applied for this grant, because I think they selected Norristown as well, but they could have selected anyone else that they'd worked with. So thank you to everyone who fostered that relationship over the years. And also, Mr. Pimentel, I appreciated your comment talking about it, instead of just buying the fun toy and then not knowing what to do with it, going the other way, starting with what do we need, what do our students need, and then figuring out how can we make that happen. Because the more teachers and staff that are trained on how to use these great, fun, exciting things, the more likely they are to use them and make time in their day to, even when maybe it's not their week, depending on how the schedules, shake out and all of that. But yeah, the more students that get access, sounds like a win to me. So thank you. Questions from anyone in the room? Yep.
So always with the special education lens, I'm just looking at, I think this is really exciting for our district, and it's amazing. I love seeing all of the information you provided today about this opportunity, and kudos to Cheltenham for, as you said, Leah, for being in the forefront and having those connections. But so I would just like to know a little more about when you say all students K-4 would be exposed and have an opportunity to work in these areas. How does that also relate to, say, students in an autism support classroom or in a Skills for Life classroom, or students who may be in gen ed only a portion of their day? Because again, going back to the idea of 280 kids, or kids who may not necessarily be identified as a typical student, but may flourish in a setting like that, that may spur and spark creativity in their own way, I guess. So I'd just like to hear a little more about how that's being sort of recognized and considered as part of this program.
Sure. So what I can speak to concretely is the students in the general ed setting who are assigned to a general ed teacher are who go into the STEM spaces on that schedule. In terms of some of the details, I don't know, especially an elementary principal, maybe you have the clearest picture of how the rotation goes.
Yeah, I'm happy to try to respond. In particular, to the point you raised with our AS students, many of them are taking reading or math in a general ed classroom. So we're really looking at an inclusive model. And so when those classes transition through the STEM lab on their designated week, those AS students are included in that rotation.
So they're being given the same time in that lab as all students. Okay, that's great to hear. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anyone? Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any questions?
No Zoom questions.
All right, no Zoom questions. All right, well, if there's no further questions, again, thank you, Mr. Pimentel, for bearing the brunt of all of our questions this evening and running through those presentations for us. A lot to think about, a lot of exciting opportunities, I think, for us as a district. So thank you. And our next meeting is December 20th, I believe. Tuesday, December 20th at 7 p.m., same place, Zoom as well, of course. And if there's any other comments or questions, I will take a motion to adjourn. All right, second.
Second.
All right. Oh, I think Pam was going to second for us, maybe, but.
I'm
All right, with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.